good intentions, do they actually help, or do they actually make things worse or hinder? And in this episode of Political Ideas and Thoughts, I'm going to be talking about this because I'm going to try and make the argument. I'm going to give you some examples, but I'm going to be making the argument about how good intentions actually make things worse. And there's a lot of newer stuff that's been showing this. And it has to do mostly with the wars in the Middle East and how the actions that the United States have been doing in the Middle East and these countries. And some other things as well, but it's going to be mainly about this idea. Because this problem persists, this idea of good intentions. Oh, well, what about these countries? Oh, you got to save these people. But they don't understand the problem with this attitude. Either they don't understand or they're purposefully manipulating you into keeping this war machine gravy train going because it serves their political purpose as a politician. Or probably more likely is that they genuinely believe that this is their good intention and it needs to be done. But it isn't necessarily. Just because something has a good intention doesn't mean that it's correct and will work and actually doesn't cause problems. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's the opposite, the situation. Now, one of my first arguments for this has to do, I didn't really think about this at the time, but I think it's a really good example of this. Is this idea that the world will end in 12 years because of climate change. And because we have these fear-mongers when it comes to climate change, because we have this, climate change deniers exist. That's because the good intentions surrounding climate change have gone to such extremes that climate change denialism is on the rise. Same argument could be made, actually more. What's the word I'm looking for? Almost more prominently than you could with the climate change argument. That all the things that people have been doing against the alt-right has actually strengthened the alt-right. They've done a lot of censorship and it's actually made the alt-right go underground, which they think that gets rid of them, but it doesn't. It doesn't really work this way. It just means they have a parallel place that they have to find to go. That means they probably go out in the world somewhere, they have meetings and they get stronger somehow, which is a definite possibility. But one of the most, probably one of the most destructive examples has to do with the wars and the police state that we have as a country in the Middle East and even in Europe and other places. But particularly this has to do with the wars in the Middle East and the actions taken in the Middle East. And the actions of us and Russia. There's a lot that I could easily go into about this because it's one of those problems where nobody tells you this stuff. Nobody explains to you how good intentions can go wrong and do go wrong, because good intentions isn't one of those end all be all things that if you have good intentions, nothing you do will go wrong. It's not how this works. And so, because people don't seem to understand this or notice this, unless you are a mindful person, or unless you can explain and show them this, then they are going to believe the hype around good intentions, and they won't even realize what's happening. So, I'm going to give you some examples of how good intentions backfire. Oh, well, Assad and Gaddafi, they were bad people. They're really bad people, and we need to deal with them somehow. We need to get rid of them somehow, right? And all this ridiculous. Basically, we're just we're basically interventionists. We're trying to interfere with this country in some way. So we get rid of Gaddafi, who was, most likely, he might have been a bad person or whatever. I don't really care. That's not really the point. He was probably very stage red, for the most part. And so, because the country that he was in, the people that he had to deal with were also very stage red and stage blue. Because he was that type of, in that type of environment, he was the only one keeping these people in check. Because he was stage red and stage blue, possibly. And so he had to deal with the country, and the only way that stage red can deal with stage red, and that's by dominating, that's by being brutal, doing very brutal things to stay in power. Not even necessarily to stay in power, but to have peace in the country, at least a form of peace, at least enough peace to where most of the country's citizens can at least have some degree of peace. And so when you get rid of this dictator, because you haven't gotten rid of the cause or the underlying cause of why this happens, why he needed to stay in power, in a sense, this problem does not go away. It gets worse, and now you have open slave markets in these areas. This area, Libya, and you have places where you have somebody like Saddam Hussein, who basically had the same problem, because he was very stage red, and the country that he was working with, the people that he's working with, very stage red. And because most people don't seem to understand spiral dynamics, most people don't seem to realize that this actually has to happen. They have to keep somebody in power who can deal with this problem without letting it spiral out of control. And so you have somebody like Saddam Hussein, who is very stage red, who, like I said, the only way you can really deal with stage red and stage blue, well, mostly stage red, it's mostly stage red and blue, and purple, and those types of areas. So the only way you can deal with that is by being stage red, being brutal, dominating. And so once you get rid of Saddam Hussein, what happens? What do you think happens? Because you're not getting rid of the cause. The cause isn't Saddam himself, for the most part. The cause is the stage of spiral dynamics that they are on. And so because you didn't get rid of the cause, you actually made the situation worse, and terrorism in that area and other areas increased. Now, some people got mad at Trump for saying this, but in a sense, he's actually right. He said that the United States created ISIS, and in a sense, he's actually kind of right, because of the actions that the United States took in the Middle East, like in Syria, and Libya, and Iraq, and Afghanistan, because of these actions that came from, if not the idea of good intentions from politicians, then the illusion of good intentions, because they came from this, it created problems because people don't understand what the actual cause of things is. They just think, oh, this man is a bad man, he has to go. Oh, Russia, Putin is a bad man, he has to go. Things like this. And so they go into Ukraine, they try and do all these things, and they put into power, I believe, if I remember correctly, the person who ended up getting put into power in Ukraine when we took it over, or whatever, was like very far right, some kind of supremacist, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. But it doesn't really matter. The point is that most people don't understand what is actually happening. They just see one person and think it comes down to just this one person. And they say, oh, this man is a bad man, we have to get rid of him. Oh, Trump is a bad person, we have to get rid of him. What they don't understand is the cause of the sort. So Trump is a symptom of basically a symptom of an ignored, festering wound that had to be dealt with in some way. I'm not saying that the people that voted for Trump were bad people, but what Trump did was he pointed out some good things, but just some things that needed to be done. Maybe he basically he pointed out problems that we had and that we were dealing with, and he made it not have done it in what I would consider to be the correct ways, because he didn't understand spiral dynamics either. But at least he had some points and some accuracies about how Iraq was a mistake, and how we shouldn't be in Syria and all these countries, even though he hasn't really done anything about them since he's gotten into office for the most part. The original sentiment that he expressed in other sentiments as well got him into power, basically. And so, good intentions don't necessarily equal good outcomes. As a matter of fact, they seem to often into the opposite. Yeah? No? Anyways, so that's basically all I wanted to say about this. I just wanted to point out this problem. I might be making some other content later today. Depends on what happens. But anyways, this is Political Ideas and Thoughts, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. I might change the name of this show, I might not. I was thinking at one point of changing it to Mindful Politics, but I don't know if I'm going to do it yet or not, so we'll see what happens. Anyways, I'll talk to you later.